Sunday, September the 3rd, year 2000. Laura Greenberg and I have just finished supper, and I've asked Laura if she would mind being interviewed. I forgot to give Laura the pre-taping sheet, so there may be some points where I'm going to have to interject. So, Laura, the part one is just as good a place to start as any. Where did your family originate, and what were their occupations?
My mother and father both came from Poland. My father came before World War I, and he worked in the ladies' trade, in the needle trade. He was. My father came from Henshin.
Where is that near?
It's the.
As far as you know.
It's very close to the Russian border, and it's in the most southeast part of Poland. My mother came from Ostrowce, and that's
West.
It's not far from Warsaw.
Yeah.
She came after the war. My parents met in Toronto. They worked in the same.
When did they come to Canada?
Well, my father came probably in before the war, so he may have come in 1910, 1911.
Okay.
My mother came after the war, so it could have been 15, 16, maybe even later.
18, 19?
No, it would have been later because they were married in, let's see, I got to start going back. I was born in 28, my brother was born in 27, my sister was born in 26, they had to be married in 25.
Right.
So maybe they met in maybe in 1920. My mother must have come about 1917, 1918.
Right, okay.
And they met, they worked in the same factory. My mother was a finisher.
When you say factory, clothing factory?
A ladies' clothing factory, yes. And then she became a fur finisher.
Okay, you were in Toronto. They're in Toronto.
My parents both worked in a ladies' garment shop. My father was an operator on the machine, and my mother was a finisher. And it was basically a family-oriented factory. A cousin of my father's, Ben Lokash, owned the factory, and my father's oldest brother, my Uncle Fischel, worked there, and my father worked there, and his best friend worked there, and a couple of my cousins worked there. My cousin Moe worked there.
And probably a lot of Lansley too.
Not necessarily. And growing up, there was a lot of union. I remember a lot of meetings in the house going on about the union, the trade unions, etc. And I vaguely remember the big strike that went on. And when they came to Canada, I don't know the ships' names, unfortunately. This is information that apparently has gone by the boards now. I might be able to get it through the archives for my own use. Yeah.
What's that? To Ottawa?
They stayed in Toronto, and they made their home in Toronto. And my father passed away in '66, and my mother passed away in 93. No, okay. 97.
And their homes, where were they situated?
We lived at 54 Oxford Street, which is in the College Spadina area in Toronto. And we grew up there. My brother, my oldest sister passed away at a very early age. She was about 4 and a half. my older brother Philip, and there's myself. There's my younger brother Seymour and my sister Rosie. My older brother is now retired and living in Arizona, and my younger brother Seymour remained a bachelor, and my sister Rosie was married, and her husband died in 1989 and in 1990. And my husband Milton Greenberg passed away in December of 1988, and we were...
Okay, let's go back. When were you born?
I was born in November of 1928.
Right.
And in Toronto, and I grew up there.
In that area?
Yeah, we lived in that area. I was born, we were living on Carlisle Street when I was born. Then we moved to Leonard Street. These are two streets that don't even exist today anymore. They were all reorganized, and we spent the rest of our days on Oxford Street, 54 Oxford Street, which is in the College and Spadina area, where mostly was the Jewish area, the Jewish market, Kensington, Baldwin. These are all famous landmarks today. And the Spadina area where all the shuls were. And I went to school at Central High. I went to Lansdowne Public School, and I went to the Central High School of Commerce.
Now, the public school, would it be like our York Street School, all with Jewish kids? Mostly
Jewish. The school was, it was an old school at the time, and in I'd say in the mid-1960s, it was torn down and a brand new school was built, a beautiful school now.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you would have a lot of good stories to tell about.
Our teachers, yes. Three of the teachers, when the Second World War broke out, three of our male teachers enlisted, and one was killed overseas during the war. He was he was on a motorcycle doing dispatches, and he was killed.
Uh-huh.
And I remember two of our teachers, the male and the female, got together. They got married, and then in those days, women teachers couldn't be married, so she had to quit.
Couldn't be pregnant either.
No, well, we don't talk about that. I got a good story to tell you about high school. I went to the United Jewish People's Order Shula, and I made a lot of friends, a lot of long-time friends that are still in Toronto. I went to camp from the age of 5 till about 14. I went to the United Jewish People's Orders camp.
Where?
In Brampton. The Shula was originally the Labor League, and the camp was the Labor League camp in Brampton, and later on the name was changed to United Jewish People's Order. And a lot of the beliefs later on turned when we found out what was going on in Russia with the Jewish people, and it was a whole turnabout. But I made I had a lot of childhood friends from camp. My brothers went to B'nai B'rith, and my brothers went to Talmud Torah. My older brother was yeshiva taught.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I was in a mandolin orchestra when I was growing up in my youth, and I was in a big choir. We sang at Massey Hall. I was maybe about 9 or 10 years old. Paul Robeson was in, and he was the guest, and we sang on stage with Paul Robeson, which has always been a big thing in my life to remember, a very big highlight. We used to go to concerts a lot at Massey Hall, which was at that time I guess the only place for concerts. As of today, there are so many more newer places.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the old Shays Vaudeville Theater,
Uh-huh.
where it was a movie house, but we used to get good acts in there. And I remember seeing the Andrews Sisters when they were just getting started. They were maybe about 17, 18 years old. And my cousin Beatrice and I walked from Spadina College to Bay and Dundas to go to the show because we could only afford the entrance to the show and not bus tickets. The Kensington Market was where you used to go get your chickens and your fish, and the sheichet was there, and it was a real old country market, and it's blossoming today because of the big ethnic population in Toronto, and but in those days I'd say it was 95% Jewish. And because all the Jews lived in that area, all the synagogues were there, and it wasn't until after the war where people started moving away and going up north.
Uh-huh.
And there used to be on Spadina, there used to be 2 kosher restaurants, and on College Street there was Becker's Delicatessen, which was strictly kosher. Shopsy's on Spadina, when it first started, was strictly kosher. These were restaurants that were closed on Saturday. Cost of food, I remember when a rye bread was 8 cents.
Yeah, but a sandwich in the restaurant.
Well, my mother used to have a cleaning lady in on Friday, so my older brother and I used to get 35 cents on Friday each. Excuse me, and this was in the early 30s. And we would go to the delicatessen on, I can't remember the name of the delicatessen, but we used to go and we used to have a full course meal for 35 cents on Friday, so we wouldn't be in the way of the cleaning lady. And but Saturday night after Shabbos, we used to be able to go to Becker's, and we used to go for there. And I also remember when they used to deliver by bicycle. You used to be able to phone these delis, and they would deliver on bicycles. And when the grocery stores, there was a grocery store on every street made out of a house, storefront.
Yeah, mom and pop tent.
A local store. I remember you used to go all week. You never used any money all week. You used to go with the book, and they used to write it in. And every Sunday, my mother would go to the store and she'd pay off her bill, and they'd fromage the page. We used to have the milkman used to come. That was milk delivery in those days. The butcher we went to ourselves, and the baker we went to ourselves, because we used to get our bagels at the grocery store every morning. But the butcher we used to go to at the corner of College in Augusta. And but everything around there was Jewish. So, I mean, growing up, you really never knew any different. Everybody was the same. And I remember Pesach, Yontif, we used to go from shul to shul, and you used to see all your friends. And as I say, Saturday nobody did anything because everybody was basically the same thing. And we had 2 non-Jewish people living on our street. Between Augusta and on Oxford Street, between Augusta and Spadina, there were exactly 2 non-Jewish families. The rest were all Jewish. And we had a shul on our street made out of an old house, a shilachol, a shtibel.
Shtibel, yeah.
And that's the type of shul my father went to. My father went to a shtibel from his, and it was mostly, the shuls were mostly made up in those days out of societies.
Oxy.
No, not Oxias. Like my mother's town was Ostrovs, so they had the Ostrovster Shul, which was on Cecil Street, which today is a Chinese community center.
Uh-huh.
My father went to a shtibel on Brunswick, right near College, and it was a house. And it was from his town. They were all Landsleit.
Yes.
And this is the way the shuls were built, from the different origins of the different cities in the shuls weren't built. I mean, this is the part of Toronto that I grew up in.
Yes.
Today, the shuls are being built altogether differently. But the I have to laugh at it now. Then we didn't think anything of it. My mother went to the Ofschafter Shul Yontif, and my father went to his shul, to the Chenshiner Shul. Although they were within walking distance, but we thought nothing of it. They went to separate shuls. Because I guess they went, my grandfather was there at the Ofschafter Shul, so we mostly went there. And growing up, my father for a long time was not a shul goer, although he never worked on Saturday because the needle trade only worked from Monday to Friday.
Yes.
And it wasn't until after my grandfather died when my mother realized that there was nobody to steer the ship, so to say, because when it came to Pesach, we always used to go to my Zeta's house for Pesach, for the Seders. And from that time on, my father took over with the help of my brother, and we started making our own Seders, and bit by bit he started coming back into going to shul on Saturday, and I remember him taking my young nephew, Joel, my sister's son, because they lived in the house. In those days, you still lived with your parents even after you got married, and he extended himself that way. And as I say, he never worked on Saturday. So, but growing up, nobody did anything on Saturday. That's just the way it was, because everybody was the same.
Now, what did you do? Go to movies on Saturdays?
Saturday afternoon we'd go to the movies. I remember we used to go for 6 cents. We used to see cartoons, cereals, and remember the Tom Mix cereals, and the Betty Boop cereals, and they used to have yo-yo contests, and bolo bat. I won a bolo bat contest, and my brother won a yo-yo contest on stage. And one thing I do remember, which is very Friday night, my mother and would take me to the steam bath every Friday night, which was around the corner on Spadina. Absolutely, which was ladies' night. And then when my sister was old enough, she would come, and my father would take the boys on Sunday.
Yes.
And then it got to a point, Sunday, my father used to leave the house about 5 o'clock in the morning and go to the steam bath. And he'd come home, by the time he came home, that's when he would have a big brunch. And it got to a point that my father used to always, it was nothing, our house was always like an open house. And it got to a point where my mother never knew how many people my father was going to bring home from the steam bath. And then after a while it got to be, we knew that there were 15, 20 men used to come home, and I used to help my mother, and my mother would cook. Everything was home cooked. She'd make gefilte fish, and she would bake, and she would make balinces, and all sorts of egg dishes, and kugels. And I mean, these breakfasts were gigantic, became gigantic.
Cholesterol free.
Absolutely. And at one time, we used to have the pleasure of the chief of police of Toronto used to come every Sunday morning with my father, came to our house for brunch. Today it was brunch, then it was breakfast. And also when we were small, my father never had a car. And came Sunday, my father loved to go on picnics. We used to always go to Brunswick, to the United Jewish People's Order, and there were always all kinds of trucks lined up. People that had truck business. They would have benches on the trucks, and I don't remember how much they used to charge. Maybe $1 for a family. And they used to pile up on the truck, and we used to drive to Camp Nivelt, and it was in Brampton. Going in those days, it seemed like we would never get there, but basically today it's no more than maybe a half hour's drive from Toronto. But in those days it was 2-lane highways, back roads, and we didn't have no 401 or Queensways and Queen Elizabeth highways. But we used to have a lot of fun going on these picnics all the time on the back of a truck. And my mother would get up very early in the morning on Sunday, and she would we'd have breaded veal cutlets, all kinds of hot chicken, and all these fancy hot foods. When we got there, we used to have we'd have kugel and roast potatoes, because my father had to have one big meal a day. And on Sunday it was lunch in the country in the summer. But all year round, my mother had to cook my mother was a scratch cooker. It was soup, winter and summer. It didn't matter. It was soup and meat and potatoes. And I also remember Erev Yom Kippur. The whole family would always congregate at my parents' house. I don't know why. Our house was always the stopping off ground. And Ois Yom Kippur, on my father's side of the family, all of my father's brothers, their wives, and their children would all congregate, and this kept on even after they were married and after they had their own children for many, many years. After Yom Kippur, they would come to us to break the fast, and it was always these huge meals until we got old enough to say to my mother, enough is enough, and we stopped with the big meals, of course, which everybody has. It became a dairy thing, but in those days we used to have, for breaking of the fast, we used to have kachka, duck. My mother that's what she would prepare, with kreplach and soup. You know, the old...
Nice on an empty stomach.
No. We would break the fast with a shot of whiskey, which today is replaced with orange juice, and a piece of honey cake. Then we'd have coffee. Then we would sit down and we'd have a meal. And we never had a dining room, but when it came to these big family dues, my mother would turn around and we'd go across the street to the shul, and we would get these tables from the shul with the horses, you know, the planks with the horses, and we'd put it right through the living room and dining room area. We'd put up 2 long tables so everybody could sit down and eat. And also, when my older brother had his bar mitzvah, we didn't have it in a hall. My mother had a woman come in and cooked for a week in the house for this bar mitzvah. And I can still see her to this day. She was standing and baking, and she's throwing the flour, like, you know, but by the time she got finished, there was flour all over the house, and my mother was shaking her head because my mother was a clean freak. She did, till the day she died, would open the fridge with a shmata in her hand because the chrome handle would get fingerprinted. And for my older brother's bar mitzvah, we went to shul Saturday morning for his ofruf, and we came back, and because my grandfather was still alive, and I don't know what sect he was to this day, because in those days we didn't know from sects. But all I know is that my younger brother was taken from the age of 3 and given to a private rebbe, and then when he was 11, he went into a yeshiva.
Where, in
Toronto? Yes. There was a house next door to the Talmud Torah on DRC where there were several boys that were learning, and even in those days, although he didn't wear a black hat, but he wore a big fedora. They wore the fedoras in those days. And his bar mitzvah, so when we came back from the shul, my father and my uncles went into the house. No women were allowed to go into the house because my Zeta came with all the rebbes from the yeshiva and his cronies from shul, and they were served, and they could only be served by men. So my father and my uncles went in and served them. And all of us, I remember my cousins and my aunts and everybody, we were all standing outside. My cousins, we were playing because we were running around. We were kids then. What was I, 12? So how old could we have been? And when they came out, then everybody went in. And then we had our party. And then on Sunday, that was Saturday, on Sunday, we had a big birthday party for my brother with all his friends. And then on Monday, my Uncle Meyer arrived from Poland. So we had to do the whole thing all over again for my uncle, because at that time my Uncle Jack came in with his brood, with my Auntie Millie, and three children from Detroit, and we had, it was another continuation Monday and Tuesday. This was a real Polish wedding. It started one week and finished. It went on all week. Yeah. But we did things at home in those days. I mean, there weren't any the shul. We didn't go to a hall in those days. My younger brothers, they got high class already. They went to the Talmud Torah. They had it catered, and because my mother said she wasn't going to go through the business of cooking at home again. Although she did a lot of the cooking, but she had this woman came in and cooked for a week, and there was flour all over everything, and our clothes it was horrible. But what else can I tell you? I'm going to go back a few years. I remember when I was 3, I had my appendix taken out, and I went to the old Sick Children's Hospital, which is now at the corner of, which was then at the corner of College and Elizabeth Street. I don't know what's in there now because it's been changed over so many times, but that was the old Sick Children's Hospital. And I remember I had an emergency appendectomy. I don't really remember everything about it, but I do remember sitting in a crib with a lot of toys and my parents coming and taking me home. And then we had a bench on the veranda, and my mother brought out a great big pillow, the pillows from the old country. Remember the real big ones? And she put it down like a mattress on this bench on the table on the veranda, and she made me a bed, and my father sat with me. It's something that stuck with me even as a kid that I can remember. I guess it was a trauma. And unfortunately, when my grandfather died, the shiva was in our house. And in those days, you still had, the doctors made house calls. And if I remember correctly, I think the big sum was $1 a visit. I remember Dr. Rosen used to always come to our house if anybody was sick. And once a year before camp, we used to have camp checkups, so we used to go there. And you didn't go for appointments. You used to go when they had visiting hours, and you would sit, and they would take you on your next. The room would get filled up, and you would sit there sometimes for hours. And growing up in Toronto, where I grew up in Toronto, within walking distance, we had the Western Hospital on Bathurst and Dundas. And on College Street, we had the Sick Children's Hospital. We had the Women's College Hospital. We had the General Hospital on University Avenue, on College and University. And then the Mount Sinai, which originally started off on Yorkville. That was off the Bay and Bloor area where it originated. My mother's aunt was one of the originators of the original Jewish hospital, which was in Yorkville, because I remember when we used to go there, I remember seeing her picture hanging on the wall. This was my mother's sister. So it would have been my great aunt.
Yeah.
She wasn't a very nice lady. She used to yell at us all the time. I started public school in 1933, and then war broke out in 1939. I remember it vividly. We were all sitting anxiously waiting and listening to the news on the old radios. And when war broke out, it was frightening. We didn't know what was, we didn't know what to expect. But it went right through. I was in grade 7 at the time, I believe, and it went right through to 45. I was in high school when war ended. And all during the war, through high school, in most of the high schools all through Toronto, we used to do all sorts of things for the war effort. My mother, after the factory, twice a week, used to go and sew at a factory for the Red Cross. And my father did some sewing at the Red Cross as well. We did all sorts of knitting. And we knitted balaclava, socks, and mitts. And at Christmas time, I know at our school, and I'm sure it went on at all the other high school, all the other schools as well, mostly the high schools, we used to fill ditty bags. And it was all stuff that was accumulated through donations, and we would send off stuff. And I remember
what stuff?
We would put in a balaclava, a pair of mitts, and a pair of socks. And the khaki was for the Navy, and we had the Navy stuff was for the Navy. They would get a razor, a bar of soap, shaving cream, toothpaste, a chocolate bar. Not a chocolate bar, hard candy, anything that wouldn't melt. And one of the girls, when we were packing the bags one day, one of the girls, we were in fourth year high school. I think it was in 43 or no, it was in 44. One of the girls, as a lark, put a note in one of the ditty bags and she got an answer back. And it started a love affair. She ended up marrying him.
No kidding.
Yeah, they met after the war. It was something that
A Jewish girl?
No, it was a non-Jewish girl, and it was something that she did as a lark, and the correspondence kept up. And when he came back, he looked her up, and they started, and it was a romance, and they ended up getting married.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, and also I remember when the war broke out, we used to have scrap drives, and they used to ask people. My mother donated all her silver. If I would have known then what I knew now, I wouldn't have given anything away. But people cleaned out all their silver. They gave silver to the war drive and all sorts of things. We used to have these piles, and then the people used to come around and pick the stuff up. And we used to have to guard it so it wouldn't get stolen. I was a Girl Guide at the time, so they asked all the Girl Guides or the Boy Scouts, whatever, and we used to come down. We stood guard, but the parents wouldn't allow us to stay overnight. But I remember my father went with a lot of other men, and stood up. People brought. You'd be surprised what people gave up during the war, and the scrap that we brought into the school that was taken out. And the other thing that I remember in when did Pearl Harbor break out?
41.
In 1941, when I came home from school after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, I came home. When Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in 41, I remember coming home from school, my mother standing on a chair in the kitchen by the cupboard, and she's smashing dishes. And I looked up on her and I said, "What are you doing?" And she says, "Chaza Alan Draird." She says the Japaneser, she says, "Chaza Alan Draird," and she was breaking everything that was made in Japan. I wished I had half the stuff today. It's worth a fortune. Anyway, that was another thing. We had air raid drills. We used to have blackouts, and we used to go and sit on the veranda. My father was an air raid warden for our street. He had a helmet and he got a flashlight. He used to have to parade up and down. We used to do that once or twice a month, I think. And we used to have blackouts, and we used to have these practices. There was rationing. We thought we had it bad, but I guess in the long run we didn't have it all that bad, because there were very few people that did without during the war, other than if you didn't have any money. And things did get better after the war financially for a lot of people, because business picked up, etc., and so on, unfortunately. And the war did affect, I'd say, every Jewish home somewhere on this side of the ocean. Fortunately, my father's side of the family all got out. They all came over way before the war, except for one sister who they tried to bring out. She was married and she had 4 children, grown children, and they begged her to come out, apparently, so the story has it, because we asked as children, how come this aunt and uncle never came, and you all did. They were one of the few people, not one of the few, a lot of people in the old country that would try to bring them out. They said nothing will happen. They didn't believe that anything would happen to them. And unfortunately, there's no sign of them at all. And my mother's side of the family, she did lose some family because they didn't all come out. But after the war, many years after the war, we found 2 of my mother's cousins. One is living in California today, and the other one went to Israel. And unfortunately, both her and her husband have passed on since. So there's only, from my mother's side, my mother's cousin's daughter is living in Israel, and I'm in touch with her.
Oh, good.
So not as often as I should be, but I am in touch with her. As a matter of fact, I just this morning I wrote her a Shana Toiva with a letter, and I've got to get she told me in the last letter that her daughter just got married this past March, so I want to send her a money order. Not that she needs any money. They're doing Kanenahor, they're doing very well in Israel. But I just feel, because I know that that's what my mother would have done.
Yeah.
So as far as losing, but we all lost. If not family, we all lost. We lost like 6 million of our own,
Yeah.
which we all know. But fortunately, in our family, it wasn't the trauma wasn't all that bad, according to some of the stories that we hear. And
okay, and so from 45 to the time you came here, were you working?
Yes, I was working as a bookkeeper, and I worked for a men's clothing store, and I handled books for 7 stores. It was a chain of 7 stores, and I handled the books there. And then it was about 53, I decided that, while I was still in Toronto, I was very active in B'nai B'rith Women, and I was a chartered member of what is now the Queen City chapter of B'nai B'rith Women, which was formed, and we're September the 20th of year 2000. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary. Unfortunately, I won't be able to attend, but I've been in touch with the people that are involved. I was always very actively involved. I was involved in UJA in Toronto from the age of 18 on. Very active in B'nai B'rith and right through. And I came here in 53. I felt that I just felt that Toronto was getting too big. I just felt I wanted a change of pace. And a couple of years prior, I had met Malka Prager up in the Montreal Mountains at the chalet.
St. Agathe.
In St. Agathe. I met Malka and her sister Ruth Fortis, who unfortunately just passed away, who will be sadly missed. And I thought, well, maybe if I came here, and I just came to look around, and my father didn't believe that I would stick it out because he figured I wouldn't have enough money to live on. And he said the first time I had to write home for money, I should come home, because he wasn't going to send me any. Anyway, it was more or less a temporary situation. I came here and I checked in. At that time, they had women's facilities at the Y, at the YWCA, and I was there for a couple of days, and I got a job through them. There was an opening at Martin K. Levinson's office, so I got a job within 2 days. I went for an interview, and they hired me right away. And upon hiring me, Joe Ages, who was then worked there as well, he got me a place to live with the old lady, may she rest in peace, Mrs. M.Z. Lithwick. She had lost her husband that year, and she was looking for someone just to have somebody in the house with her, so I went in there to live with her. I lived with her for a couple of years. And
where was this?
On Friel Street. Then we moved to Nelson and Friel, and I moved with her, and I stayed with her for a little while, and then I wasn't too happy there because things weren't working out, and at that point already, working for Martin K. Levinson, I had already met Milton Greenberg, who I ended up marrying, and
where was he? He was working
He
there
was
too?
working at Martin Levinson's office. He was a student in accounting at the time. Morris Agolnik was working there. Milton Kimmel was working there. Izzy Lando had just graduated and moved out. Herbie Nadalny worked there prior to when I came. And, at that time...
Morris Cohn, was he there too?
No, Morris Cohn wasn't there. At that time, Martin Levinson was about the only Jewish accounting firm, so everybody passed through there. But from him, Herbie Nadalny left and opened up on his own. Morris Agolnik, when Joe Ages left, Morris Agolnik went with him. And in later years, Murph bought out Joe, and the partnership became Agolnik and Greenberg. And I got the job at Martin Levinson's, as I say, and it didn't take long. I remember I was working there for about a week. I got a phone call from Rabbi Eckstein, And I thought I was going to die because I wondered, why did the rabbi want to see me? He wanted to see me in his office. Anyway, I went down and I was, anyway, what he did is he had heard that I was new in town, and he wanted to introduce himself and to let me know that his office was open at any time if I needed anything, if I needed any advice or any help, that he had an open door policy, I could come and see him, which I thought was very nice. When I first came in '53, I found the community very, very, very warm. People accepted me almost immediately. And I remember meeting you, Joe. You were working at Steinberg's, at A.J. Freeman's. They were downstairs in the basement. And I had to do some shopping, and Murph took me in there.
Did I stop you for shoplifting?
No. But I remember meeting you, and I remember walking out and saying, God, is he big? Anyway, Murph was working there at the time, and it was just one of those things that we just sort of got together, and I don't know, it just went on. It was just one of those things that I guess, what do you call it? Just developed, love at first sight or whatever. But the type of office that we had, we would Thursday nights we used to go to the basketball games because Sam Shapiro worked for Schaefer's at the time, and they had the basketball team. Right. So every Thursday night we would go out for a bite to eat. We'd go to the basketball, but it was more or less like a whole office. An office.
Thank God it's Thursday.
That's right. And Martin Levinson was always very nice. We had an open door policy with him. I was there many Shabbat evenings with his family, and what's her name? Lillian Gertzman. I had met her years before at a B'nai B'rith convention, and when I came here, I had called her, and there was no young business and professional group, so she put me on to, they were just trying to reorganize BBG at the time, B'nai B'rith Girls, and I became the advisor, and Normie Lesh at the time became the advisor at the same time that I became the advisor for BBG. He became the advisor of AZA, and that's how I got to meet Normie Lesh. And one thing and another developed, and just things went on like from one family to the next. And when I contacted Malka Prager, Ruth Fortis was already married. Malka was still single at the time. And we got together, and about the second week that I was here, Malka introduced me to Rose Taylor, and it was Rose Cardish at the time, and Lily Penso, which was Lily Greenberg, not knowing that eventually I would become her cousin, and things that we became very fast friends, and we're still friends to this day. And with Rose, she ended up marrying Chick Taylor, and we have our children are all about the same age, and we're going into a third generation, like Rose and Chick's children and my son are very close friends, and now Mona, who is Rose and Chick's daughter, lives in Toronto, and my son Mark lives in Toronto. They have become very, very close again, and their children are now very close. That's going into a third generation, and it's like one big happy family. I mean, we keep together, we see each other all the time, and we keep in close contact. In 1955, June of 1955, Milton, who is always referred to as Murph, is a nickname that he got in the Army. I never knew that name.
Yeah, Shapiro called him Kansas.
Yeah, no, Burlap. Abie gave him that name. Yeah. Murph and I got married in June of 1955 in Toronto at the Men of England Synagogue, which has since burnt down. And I remember when we were living in Toronto, we were coming home from work, and we bumped into a long procession behind a hearse, and I came home, and there was women, and they were crying, and the biggest procession that I ever seen. When we got home and we were sitting at the dinner table, I remember saying to my father, Pa, who died? I said, there was such a big procession. He says, nobody died. He says, that's when the shul burnt all the Torahs and Siddurim. They had to bury them. And I have never in my life since seen such a funeral. Because they walked the length of Spadina. They walked behind the hearse.
Yes.
I guess all the members from the shul and everything.
From the whole city.
Well, from that area anyway.
Sure,
yeah.
Sure.
So I had never seen this before. And speaking about shuls, I remember I have to go back to being a child and growing up in Toronto. There was a family that lived across the street from us, the Teppermans, and when their daughter Polly went to get married, they walked the Cullah and the whole family with a Torah dressed in a white mantle. They walked all up Oxford Street to Spadina and across the street over to the shul. And I had said to my mother, Ma, why are they walking with a bride, in her wedding dress, with a Torah? And she said, when Polly was a very young girl, she was very, very sick, and she was next to death's door. And the mother, I'm going to cry, the mother had promised that if God would give her life, that the day of the Chipah, she would dedicate the Torah.
Isn't that something?
And that's
what a beautiful story.
Walked.
Yeah.
And they walked with the Torah in the street to the shul.
What a wonderful story.
And you know what? I couldn't have been more than about 7 or 8 years old when that happened. I remember it vividly like it was today.
Yeah.
Anyway, I still cry every time I think of it. Going back to, we were married June of 55. We came back to Ottawa after we got married, and we lived on Mark Avenue, on Greensway. We were there until November. We were only there 5 months because my husband got a job in Windsor in the income tax department. And we moved there. Muriel and Bernie Putterman were living there at the time. And the only good thing about moving to Windsor was Murph's sisters lived in Detroit, and I had a lot of cousins from my mother's side that lived in Detroit. And having moved to Windsor and started setting up housekeeping there, not too happy. It was not a very, having come from a very congenial, very warm city like Ottawa and going to a city like Windsor, and a few people told me you have to live here for 10 years before you get accepted. And I said right from the beginning, I ain't going to be there that long. And believe me, I wasn't. We were there for 18 months. And most of the 18 months, I would say that every weekend we were in Detroit, and I picked up with some of my cousins, and we spent time with Murph's sisters. At that point, we moved back to Toronto because my husband was offered a job by a cousin of mine who had who ran economy construction, and they needed a controller. And we took the job, and I was never so glad to come home in all my life. And we lived there until 1961, when our son Mark was born. He was born in June of 61. And that's when my husband decided to tell me that he was not very happy in Toronto, and he would like to come back to Ottawa. I had almost had him convinced to go back to school and take law, because he had graduated as a chartered accountant. And
he was at Queen's, wasn't he?
Yes, he graduated from Queen's. He had 2 degrees at Queen's. After the war ended, he was in the service, and after the war he went back to got his 5th year of high school, then went to Queen's, got 2 degrees, got a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Commerce, then went into the CA program. And anyway, I tried to convince him to go back to school and take law, because I thought that he would be very well suited in that position. He was a terrific talker. And we were going to move into my mother and father's house. My mother was going to look after my son. I was going to go back to work. My husband was going to go to school. But he tried Ottawa, and he came back with a big job working for the late Mo Kaufman. So we came back, and we resettled here December the 1st of 1961. And we've been here ever since. And as a matter of fact, when we came back in 61, we came back to Mark Avenue, we went to 80 Mark Avenue. And that's when we met, we always knew people on Mark Avenue. Joe and Jesse Murray were there, Ethel and Abe Murray were there. The Tannenbaums were there, Normie and Judy. Adele Abrams lived across the street. And we used to have a lot of fun on that street. And then from there we moved to 1613 Pullen Avenue, and our neighbors were Sarah and Mo Resnick and Leah and Bobby Genscher. And with the Genschers being across the street, my son fast became friends with, we all became very, very close friends, and our kids all grew up together. And Mark to this day is considered, although the Genschers have 5 sons, Mark is considered the 6th son in that family. And here in Ottawa, I became very active in Pioneer Women Na'amat, and very active in Malziki Adas Shul through the Sisterhood. And after 45 years, I finally became a board member. We used to go to the Histadrut for all the old Histadrut house on Laurier Avenue.
Whereabouts?
Laurier and what's the cross street there?
Blackburn or
Russell.
Russell, I think.
Yeah, right at the corner. And we used to have our meetings there. We used to meet in houses, but we used to have our bazaars used to be held there. Our closing banquets used to be held there. And all the old timers, like the late Frida Sweetco and Mrs. Lipson. Oh, there's so many people that Mrs. Schinder. These are people that are all gone. Your late mother, and there's so many. The Sonny Viner, Mrs. Levinson, names that they sort of pass you by. And the shul teas, we always had shul teas at the shul that we used to run through the sisterhood. We had a lot of fundraisers.
How did they work, those shul teas?
Used to go down. Well, in those days, everybody, we were allowed to, in those days we could bake our own stuff. It wasn't until Rabbi Reuben came along when he put the kibosh on and he said everything had to be baked in the shul. That's when it all stopped. And we used to, in a rinky-dink kitchen, I remember, when it came to Hanukkah, we used to, the late Reva Applebaum and the late Fritzie Greenberg and Edith Dabrowski, may she rest in peace, the Lily Saslov, I could go on and mention all the old-timers. We used to go down and we used to fry latkes for the children and make the big parties. And I remember the late Mr. Nadalny every couple of weeks used to make pails of herring, which we used to have Shabbos for Kiddushim. And the sisterhoods used to, there weren't any caterers in those days for the Kiddushes. The sisterhood ladies used to go down. The sisterhood members used to go down. We used to order cake. We used to order 2 cakes, a sponge cake and a honey cake, and we used to have herring every week. But for special occasions, we used to bring in, like for Simchas Torah, Mrs. Klug used to make us the rolled cabbage, and we used to have the big parties. But I do remember it was a big uprising because the men would have the big sudas, and the women weren't allowed to sit down. But at Simchas Torah, we used to have a children's party, and then the men, and the women used to have to go home, because in those days it was strictly a man's affair. When Rabbi Bolka came in on the scene, even the Kiddushim Saturday, the women sat on one side of the room and the men sat on the other. We couldn't sit together. Until finally we sort of, I guess you could call it a little rebellion, and we asked Rabbi Reuben, is it necessary that why we have to be separated downstairs for a kiddush? She says, absolutely no reason at all. And may she rest in peace, the late Mrs. Pleat objected to it vehemently. I guess she couldn't accept change. But she eventually came around, And I remember we used to have great parties down in the old Murray Street shul. And Hanukkah, we had big Hanukkah balls where we would mostly do our own cooking. And Yom Kippur services, packed to the rafters, you couldn't get in. You couldn't get in Yom Kippur at our shul. And the Chevra Mishnayos used to be big in our shul, and Joe was reminding me, during services all through Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we used to have two heats downtown in the old Malziki, hot and cold, and it was usually hot Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and one minute we would close the windows, the next minute we would have to open them, and the late Chazan Bornstein couldn't stand there was a draft, so he couldn't sing, and Mrs. Pleat, may she rest in peace, used to yell, "Vermach the Winde," because it was drafty. Mind you, she sat right in front of the window, so her back was, probably she felt a draft on the window. But we used to have a lot of fun, and we were sitting, to this day, I can picture the old shul, I can pretty well go around the room in my mind and tell you who sat where, and still picture all the old members sitting in the shul and where they sat. The late A.B. Kardish and the late Mr. Katz, and my late father-in-law, and my uncles, my Uncle Berchik, my Uncle Morris, and the women used to, in the shul, the women sat upstairs, the men downstairs, but the women had the seats facing the men. And I remember I sat on one side, and the upstairs, and the Murray sat opposite me on the other side.
Yeah, like the men and women faced each other,
That's
like
right.
husbands and wives faced each other.
That's right. And we had these seats for years and years and years. And you know, I remember too, when we first got married, the first Yom Tov we were here, my late father-in-law said to us, "Why are you coming to our shul?" Because Malziki was basically at that time in the 50s, in the mid-50s, was basically older members. Beth Shalom was starting to get the new younger crowd, and they had Rabbi Eckstein, and he was a fancy rabbi. And my late father-in-law said, "Kinder, why are you coming here to Malziki? Why don't you go to Beth Shalom, where there are younger people?" And we said, my husband, as a matter of fact, said that he wanted to stay in the shul where his parents davened, and where all his, mostly his friends. And it's true, I think most of our friends stayed at Murray. And we used to have a lot of fun. We all used to walk from Mark Avenue, Yom Kippur. There was a whole parade. We all walked to shul in those days because everything was close.
Yeah, Rita Street was dead.
That's right. Yeah. Everything was closed. I remember when the stores were closed. All the big department stores were closed, but they were owned by Jewish people.
Now Charles Ogilvy.
No, but I do remember the first year that A.J. Freeman opened his doors on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and I just found out recently, I mean, a lot of people complained about it. They thought it was terrible, and I remember people saying that if 3 days out of the year were going to make a difference in your business, you might as well close your business altogether. But I just found out recently that the reason he opened is when they went public, when they put their shares on the market publicly, that they had to open at that time.
Due to one of the conditions.
One of the conditions, apparently. I just found this out not too long ago. We were just talking about it. And in I stayed at home. I was a stay-at-home mom till my son went into Hillel Academy at age 5, and I started back to work. I worked for Harold Shankman for a few years. Then I went to work for Mercury Reproductions, and I stayed there for about 7 years. And then I went to the Jewish Community Center. Hy Hochberg, may he rest in peace, called me in because I wasn't working. He needed somebody somebody was going to Europe on a holiday, one of his bookkeepers, and he asked me if I would come in on a part-time basis. Saturday nights we would go to the racetrack. We would get together. There weren't, other than a movie, there was very little doing here unless you went across the hall to some of the clubs, which we didn't do very often because we couldn't afford it in those days. We used to have a lot of get-togethers. We'd go to different houses Saturday night. We'd get together, and every time I went to Toronto for a visit to my parents, I would come home with parcels of food. So my mother used to shove food on me we didn't have where to keep that kind of stuff. So I used to get the gang together, the old gang, and they used to come and we used to make a party. And this is the way we used to entertain ourselves, basically. And I remember sitting outside in the summer on Mark Avenue, and everybody would be sitting outside. You'd mootle and you'd kibitz. And when I first came to Ottawa, I remember the houses on Albert Street. There were all the old houses. Today they've all been replaced by these big monstrosity buildings. And I was here when the old synagogue. There were two synagogues that merged. Rideau and King Edward. Rideau Street was still around when I first came. And I remember when they were building Beth Shalom and they merged. I saw the new Agudath Israel come into being. The old Imbro restaurant.
Yeah, right next to the show.
I got to tell you a funny story. Murph and I went in there for supper one night, and we weren't married, but it was after work. We went in there and we were sitting at the counter. I was reading the newspaper. He was reading the newspaper. We both ordered. And it was late because we had worked overtime, so I didn't want to eat anything all that heavy. And Mike Imbro came and started yelling at Murph why he doesn't feed me any better. Why is he allowing me to eat? Because if I remember correctly, all I ordered was an order of spaghetti and tomato sauce. And he started yelling at Murph that wasn't enough for me. Why wasn't he seeing to it that I ate properly? I said, but that's all I want. But you didn't start up with Mike Imbro, because if he started to yell, I said, you shook in your boots. Yeah, but there weren't very many other places. The other place, like even after the show, the Diamond Barbecue on Bank Street, the best pies in the world. And to this day, I have one of the pie plates. You used to have to pay $1 for the pie plate, and you would get it back if you took it back. But one pie plate I never got around to taking back, and I still have it. But their pies were to die for. Absolutely. But that was about the only restaurant. The Connaught, not so much. Then the La Paloma came.
Jake the Fake.
Yeah. But then I remember seeing when Joe Ages left Martin Levinson, and he opened up the restaurant, Sherry's Restaurant on Spark Street.
Yes. Of the Laura Greenberg taping, and Laura, you were just starting to tell us about restaurants in Ottawa.
When Joe Ages teamed up with Murray Macy in a partnership and opened up Sherry's Restaurant, that was the start of some of the better restaurants to start opening up here in Ottawa. And I remember we were still all working for Martin Levinson, and Joe Ages asked me if I would come along and help him set up the books there, which I did and I worked with him evenings and on weekends sometimes, but mostly a few evenings a week. And I helped them get started in their office and set up their accounting, and I helped them out to a degree. And I remember having to teach Murray Macy how to do the payroll. And his father, Sam Macy, was also an entrepreneur here in town. And I believe he owned a hotel at one time. Then he went into the... things started opening up in the late 60s. Everything was still shut down on Sundays. There was nothing open. There weren't any ball games. Everything was Monday to through to Saturday. And it was Charlotte Whitten that started the ball rolling and helped it along until we got Sunday football games.
She was against it.
No, but up
till
her.
Whitten, yeah.
After that, things started opening up, and the Ottawa Rough Riders were going great guns. They were great at that time. We were season ticket holders for many years because Murph had been going to the football games for many years. And when we got married, I figured if can't beat them, you got to join them, because I didn't know a football from a hockey puck at that time, and I shouldn't really say that. I knew what football was all about, but I never followed it. And I didn't want to be a football widow, so I went along and I started enjoying the game very much. And we were diehards, and we went right up until the end. And lot of changes, even along Rideau Street. Of all the different things that have changed over the years. A lot of the old stores aren't there. When they built the Rideau Center, there were so many things that were torn down. Rideau Street used to be a lovely street to shop on. They used to have some very nice stores. And I remember going along Spark Street. If you went shopping to Spark Street, you had to get dressed. There was no such thing as going down in shorts or slacks. You always got dressed to the nines to go shopping on Spark Street, because all the good stores were there. And things have changed over. Spark Street is, to me, it's like a schlock street right now. Now it's, I don't know if they'll ever bring it back. And Rideau Street is not what it used to be. It used to really be very nice shopping. And I remember Christmas time, the Freeman windows were something which I was used to, because the Eaton store in Toronto, which is now defunct, unfortunately, used to have these gorgeous windows at Christmas time, and the parades and everything. And then all our friends started getting married. Like our circle of friends grew, and I guess we all grew together over the years. And financially, we all prospered to a degree. I went to work after I left Mercury Reproductions. As I started saying before, I had sort of gone into semi-retirement when Hy Hochberg, may he rest in peace, called me one day and asked me if I would come in and help him out, because one of his bookkeepers were going away for about 6 weeks. I went in there in April of, I think it was 80 or 81, and I stayed till 93. 95, excuse me, 95. I stayed till 95. So from a 6-week position, it turned into a permanent position, where I ended up, by the time I left, I was the assistant controller of the VOD, and I've got a lot of good memories of working there. I worked with, and I was also, besides working, I was very active in UJA and through Shul and through Naamat, and I am now sitting on the board of the Ottawa Jewish Community Foundation, which I headed up while I was working. I'm on my second term of being on the board for the foundation. I was on the board of Malziki Adas. I'm on the board of Jewish National Fund, and I volunteer at the Heart and Stroke Foundation 1 day a week, and I'm a member of the Chevra Kadisha. Having worked at the JCC for as many years as I did at 151 Chapel, I saw the transition and the being of Hillel Academy, where it used to be on Chapel and at Agudath Israel. I saw it come into being when we bought the 881 Broadview property. I saw it come into being into one school, which was a dream of many people. I never thought I would see it in my lifetime, but it was a very, working with it and seeing it grow, it was really an accomplishment. And now the other big accomplishment that I've seen is from when I first came, there was no, the only thing that was standing on Chapel Street was the community center per se. The shul came afterwards. So when I came, you used to walk up the steps of the community center, and all that was sitting there upstairs was the late Annie Altman and Bernice Feller, may she rest in peace, and High Hodgberg, 3 desks. Other than that, and then downstairs was the social hall, where A.B. Nadrich and his brother had the snack bar. The kids used to we used to lap up the hot dogs, and the Sunday night dances that were there all the time. So I saw that grow from that. I saw it grow into the new community center, which is now a magnificent facility. And I saw the old Hillel Lodge at 125 Württemberg come into being. And now I've very actively involved in the auxiliary of Hillel Lodge over the last few years. And I've seen the new lodge come into being. And I was privileged to have a private tour a week ago with a number of other ladies that were going to be tour guides on the opening of the 24th of September. And we got a bird's eye view of the new building. And I must say it is something that I never in my wildest dreams ever thought that we would have here in the community. It is a first-class facility, very, very nice. Backtracking a bit, my husband was a chartered accountant, and he was in business he worked for the government for a few years, and then he went into he worked for Mo Kaufman for a few years, and then went into public accounting. He bought out Joe Aegis' partnership with Morris Agolnik, and the firm of Agolnik and Greenberg came into being. And they were quite successful, and we were, as I say, we were married in 1955, and we had 33 good years of marriage. Unfortunately, he died in December of '88. Prior to that, we had one son who was born June of '61, and we came back. Mark was born in Toronto in June of '61, and we moved back to Ottawa in December of '61. Mark was basically raised here in Ottawa, went to Hillel Academy, and went to Hillcrest High School. From Hillcrest, he went back to Toronto, to the University of Toronto, and he got his Bachelor of Science degree, and then entered medical school. And he graduated from medical school in June of '88, and he married in August of '88, and he married Melissa Greenberg from St. Catharines, who is a graduate lawyer, and they've got a very nice life, and they live in Toronto, and they have 3 beautiful children, Ryan 5, Max 4, and Jake 2. And I am planning at the end of November of 2000 to join them back in Toronto, because I would like to have a family life with my own
You're talking
family
like a Bubba.
and my children. Yeah. Absolutely, I miss my grandchildren, and I don't want to be a part-time grandmother.
Yeah.
And he's a very successful doctor. He's got a nice practice, and he's in family practice, and he also deals with drug addiction. Him and his partner Peter Garber. And they were the ones that brought into Canada the family. My son Mark has got a very successful family practice with a partner, Peter Garber, and they also deal with drug addiction. And they were the ones that brought into Canada the program for getting off drugs through a system with you're put under anesthetic, and there are a few drugs that are administered, and when you come through this, it's about a 5 to 6 hour procedure when you come out of this procedure, you have bypassed the withdrawal, but you have to go on to counseling. And the treatment is very successful. It was practiced in the United States. They got their degrees in the United States for drug addiction, and it's very popular in England, Israel, and in parts of Europe. When it was brought into Canada, they were a little bit, the drug addiction center here in Canada was a little uppity about it, but they're doing very well with it, and they seem to be helping a lot of people. They also dole out methadone in their clinic, which is part of the program.
Okay, you were very active in the show.
I was very active. I always have been active in Moziki Hadass, and I've stayed active up till now. As I said, I was on the board up till a little while ago, and
okay, I'm going to pose a question, or I'll start you off. Laura, a number of people have commented in the past, as you're quite aware, Laura talks too much, or Laura says her piece. You've never been afraid to state your views or your feelings. How would you answer these critics of yours?
I can answer my critics to one degree. I feel that I have to. I've always been this way. I tell the truth. I tell it the way it is. I know a lot of people don't like it because I learned a long, long time ago from a very high up person that nobody likes to hear the truth. But that's the way I am. I tell it the way it is, and it may not always be the right way, but that's the way I am. At this stage of my life, I don't think I could change. I won't back away from an argument. If I feel I'm right, I'll stand my ground. If I'm not sure, or if I know I'm wrong, I'll back down. But if I feel that I'm right and I have a point, I will stick to my guns.
Another thing, Laura, and Jesse and I, we've commented a couple of times, how in the heck did you find time to do all the things you were involved? Because you used to save the stamps for me, so I know all the things that you're involved in. Where did you find time to do all of this here?
I don't know. It's something that was inbred in me. I just can't sit around and do nothing. I never neglected my husband. I never neglected my son. There was always time. But rather than just sit around and shoot the breeze or do nothing, I just felt I could be of more. I could put myself, my whole being, to better use in helping others and doing things that I like doing that does benefit other people.
No, I don't want you to knock anybody, but I haven't got time for some of these stupid poker games, and you with your mahjong games and so on. Isn't it sad that these people find they don't have time, or they have too much time? I don't know what it is.
I don't either, because I did play Maj many years ago, and I dropped out because I just felt it wasn't self-fulfilling. And even to this day, a few of my friends have tried to tell me that I'd be a terrific bridge player. I tried it. I just don't like it. I would just as soon give my time to things that are going to benefit other people and make me feel better. And maybe this was something that I learned from my parents. My parents were always active. My mother, years and years, I remember she was always active in, which is what is now called Baycrest. In those days it was called the Moishes of Canaan. It started out on Cecil Street. And she was always selling tickets. After the war, my parents did an awful lot to settle refugees that were brought out of Poland. And things that went on right in our own home. I guess this is something that's been inbred in me. I don't know. That's just the way I am. I guess I give more of myself than what I do otherwise.
Do you do knitting?
I knit. Up to a certain point, I can't now anymore. Old age, arthritis, shoulder problems.
Knitting for the Enigla.
No, I never knitted for the 8 o'clock. My daughter-in-law doesn't like knitted clothes, but I did an awful lot of knitting over the years, and I've knitted for Hilla Lodge, and unfortunately now the hands just aren't what they used to be, and I just can't do it anymore. So I did a little bit, and I do whatever else I can, and wherever I can. If people call me, the biggest problem with me is I've never learned how to say no.
Yeah. You've done traveling around the world? Various places in the
To
world.
a degree. I've been to Alaska, I've been to California several times. I've been to Israel 3 times. I was supposed to go to England 3 years ago, and unfortunately my mother died. And funnily enough, I must tell you something with this trip. When I was planning this trip, I had told my mother at the time that I was going to England, and she says to me, "Oi, es ist so weit." So I didn't answer her, and then when the call came and I had to call, I was going with Doreen Arnone, and she was going to be my tour guide. This was a trip that we had always talked about from the time we became friends in '61, and we've been friends ever since, that we would go to England together and she would be my tour guide. And we're really looking forward to this trip. And when I phoned her, I says, "Doreen, I guess it wasn't meant to be." I said, "My mother didn't want me to go. It was too far."
Yeah,
I said, because these were her last words to me. She says, "Too far to go."
yeah.
So anyway, I would like to go to see my brother in Arizona one of these days. I've been to Vegas a couple of times. During my married life, we did travel across the United States by car, and we've taken a few trips. I've been out west. The only thing I have left to do is go down east, and I will have done all of Canada, which is something I would like to do before I pass on. Is go down east. Out of my husband's family, which was at one time a very large family, the uncles are all gone, my in-laws are gone. There's just the first cousins and their children and their families, which the families, from big families, they become smaller families. It's the same thing that's happened to our family in Toronto, which was a very large family, and a lot of people are missing today. Murph still has 2 sisters living in Detroit. They, over the last couple of years, have lost their spouses as well. And I have my family in Toronto. None of us have. We haven't got. Both my parents are gone, and really, there's nothing much more. There's just myself and my siblings, and we'll make the best of whatever we can from now till the end.
Okay, Laura. This is a thank you and a goodbye type of tape.